but yeah, and then, perfect. Nice work.
All right, we're recording. All right, so anarchism, a revolutionary socialist critique. I have a intro I'm going to read. So why do this topic, anarchism, and why do a revolutionary socialist critique on it? Anarchists and socialists can have revolutionary aims and tactics. They've worked alongside each other in fighting the state and right-wing fascists, but also have come into conflict with one another, both ideologically and physically, as in conflict. It is important as revolutionary socialists to analyze anarchist ideology and tactics over time to assess its revolutionary potential and usefulness or lack thereof in uplifting the working class in its struggle. My background with this is that anarchist themes through punk music is what opened myself and others up to revolutionary ideas in high school. I was part of a small part of an anarcho-punk collective scene in Chicago in the early 2000s, following the new war on terror, the wave of patriotism after 9/11, nationalism, the destructive spread of economic neoliberalism or globalization. It was for me an entryway into the opposition to capitalism, war, homophobia, transphobia, poverty, and the class struggle. So I admired the small scale collective action of individuals within that subculture. I like the organizing punk shows, hosting vegan potlucks, organizing critical mass where bicyclists take over the streets, preparing for protests against white supremacist groups. I liked all that, but aside from that, I observed a lack of discussion how to connect what they were doing outside of that punk scene and connecting it with other working class people. Given all that, observing that lacking, I saw that there wasn't really much of a discussion about what to do next. How does this connect outside of just this pocket, this subculture? Were we who were doing that at the time just participating in that, but still under the umbrella of living in a oppressive capitalist society? Would we convert all working class people to the anarcho-punk lifestyle? Is that how we would defeat capitalism, achieve equality, reach utopia? That with other questions of, along with who will lead a revolution, led myself and others to explore instead socialism as a revolutionary pathway. So with that, let's jump into it. What is anarchism? It's opposition to any form of coercive authority. It's anti-authoritarian. No leaders, no masters is a typical type of slogan, but a lot of just opposition to perceived figures of authority, opposed to state power and seek to destroy it. Political abstention, which means not participating in anything, moving towards reforms, voting, just being outside of the political system altogether. Anarchists tend towards individualism over collectivism. I put an asterisk there because there are some anarchist groups that use collectivism as a focus. We'll get into that later, but also individual, on a small level, anarchists do collective activities on a very local level, but it's different than the collectivism that is perceived by socialists. I threw in that Choking Victim album cover because I feel like it depicts like a typical anarchist, type of, no gods, no managers, a lot of like anti-religious type of, imagery and such. Bakunin versus Marx, mid-1800s. Proudhon and Bakunin, the founders of anarchism, felt that they were for freedom. They criticized Marx as the harbinger of state tyranny. and his followers as worshippers of state power and champions of order established from the top downwards. Bakunin and his followers, I like this picture at the bottom. It's a classic of Marx and Bakunin hanging out on the subway together. No, but they were, big rivals. They disagreed with each other. The first international was formed around 1864, and Bakunin and his followers tried to undermine Marx. And what the first international was a collective of leftists, anarchists, socialists of the time. But Bakunin tried as much as he could to undermine Marx because he disagreed with him. They debated, as we'll get into. So who are the authoritarians? Pierre-Joseph Proudhon opposed strikes and supported the police breaking them up. He opposed working class revolution. And these are classic anarchists that I'm quoting here. Mikhail Bakunin said the spontaneous revolutionary action of the masses should be supplemented by the invisible direction of a handful of self-selected revolutionaries, or as Bakunin said, the secret universal association of international brothers. 100 powerfully and seriously allied revolutionaries are enough for the international organization of the whole of Europe, he said. Emma Goldman said, the masses are crude, lame, pernicious in their demands and influence and need not be flattered, but to be schooled. I wish not to concede anything to them, but to drill, divide, and break them up and draw individuals out of them. Many early anarchists were inspired by the liberal Enlightenment thought and came from what Marx called the petty bourgeoisie class, which included the small craft and artisanal classes. Marx said anarchism was the movement of the artisanal worker, that is to say, the self-employed craftsman with some leisure time to think and talk, not subjected to factory hours and discipline, independently minded and difficult to threaten, not backward like the peasantry. While many of the craft and artisanal classes were ruined by capitalism and forced to work in the factories, there was a distinction between them and the other workers. Move this out of the way. We see that early anarchists' views on authorities and the masses bring up contradictions. They oppose authority, but have an elitist view of a secret society leading a revolution instead of the workers. They see the workers as uneducated and incapable of leading a revolution. Would they not seem to tend towards authoritarianism themselves? Traditional anarchism, or Big A as it's referred to, during the Russian Revolution and subsequent civil war, some anarchists supported the Bolsheviks while others fought against them. Some joined the peasantry to fight against the Bolsheviks and the White Armies. So anarchists kind of were in multiple sides within the Russian Revolution. The ones that were anarcho-syndicalists, which I'll get into in the next couple of slides, were the ones that did support the Bolsheviks. In the US and Europe in the late 1800s, early 1900s, anarchists engaged what they call propaganda of the deed, or direct action, which sometimes included individual acts of terror, such as bombings and assassinations, to inspire revolt against the state. In that picture bottom right is it's a painting or drawing, but President McKinley getting shot by an anarchist in probably 1900 or 1901. The Spanish Revolution and Civil War, 1930s, part 1. So I put that in there. The revolution and the Civil War kind of overlap for a period. So I'll speak kind of just during this whole period. During the Spanish Revolution, which was the initial period of 1936, anarchist influence in the workers' struggle was at its peak. They dominated the Iberian Anarchist Federation, that's the FAI, and the National Confederation of Workers, which is the CNT. We see over here on the right, that's the flag for both of those groups. This is the CNT emblem down here. You can see my cursor. But they were also had a lot of influence in other workers' organizations. So anarcho-syndicalism was the dominant idea at the time, which had some similarities with socialism. They believe in revolutionary industrial unionism as a pathway to fighting capitalism. So within anarchism, there's a lot of different types of anarchism. There's something called anarcho-communism. There's a lot of kind of crossover where it's they believe in organizing on a smaller level. So, you know, these revolutionary unions, but they don't really see any, any form of government or state. They only really speak of these unions and they're opposed to any other power. It's the general feeling within anarcho-syndicalism, anarcho-communism, and those types of anarchisms. They supported the anarcho-syndicalists, that is, supported workers and participated in unions, but due to beliefs in political abstention, refused to vote at a time when a right-wing government was elected. The Popular Front, a coalition of anarcho-syndicalists, Republicans, pro-Stalin reformist socialists, and other opposing socialists, was formed to fight Franco's nationalist forces and were able to seize factories and land. So for a while, they had defeated Franco for the moment. After mostly defeating Franco, anarchists refused to take power as a workers' government. The power vacuum that this created allowed for a popular front government, which was influenced by reformists, capitalists, landowning classes to take control. They then disarmed the working class movement to prevent a further worker revolt against that new Popular Front power. Eventually, the Popular Front, though, lost to Franco's nationalist fascist forces. During that downtime, Franco was able to build up. If the Spanish workers were organized into workers' councils, such as in the Russian Revolution, they could have seized power from the Popular Front as a workers' government. They could have also kept the momentum in defeating the nationalists and Franco at a time when they were weak. The Workers' Party of Marxist Unification, the POUM, we see their flag on a poster over here on the left, initially fought alongside the anarchists in the Popular Front. The POUM was inspired by Trotsky and was therefore opposed to the Stalinist-leaning leadership in the Popular Front. The POUM was eventually attacked by the Popular Front and anarchists for their opposition to the Stalinists, that is, and labeled as fascist sympathizers. Many were killed and then the rest were forced to go underground. Between that period in the 30s and the 60s, there's not much influence of anarchism really noticed. But the 60s brought social upheaval. New radicals were inspired by the revolutionary movements of Cuba and Vietnam. Marxism was seen by many from the oppressive Stalinist perspective. Young radicals saw this and they wanted a third way which opposed the imperialist powers of both the East and the West. The USSR and the US at the time. They wanted to oppose both of those because they saw them as oppressive. They associated Marxism with that kind of state power that they saw in Stalin. In the 70s, radicals participated also in the feminist movement. There was also, I believe it was the anti-nuclear movement against nuclear arms testing and use. Into the 80s, the anarcho-punk subculture. So anarchism became a dominant idea and aesthetic within the late 70s, early 80s punk subculture, in not just the US, in the UK, but also around Europe, even within the USSR, in Eastern Europe, around the world, was kind of spreading. Anarchism became the dominant idea. Oh, I already said that. Punks found in anarchism a shared belief of opposition to authority and conformity, what they saw in their era. So Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher in the UK, 80s conservatism, pop culture, gender norms, religion, Cold War era politics, things like that. This subculture attacked what they saw as a conservative working class, which had become brainwashed robots. So they didn't really have a connection, the punk subculture, with the working class. Punks criticized the earlier hippie culture, but they shared with it its anti-work ethic, the communal living, and music-centered culture. Into the 90s and shift to personal politics. Delivery of anarcho-punk subculture through music, zines, and artists. Focus on abortion rights, anti-racist activism, which led to the formation of the Anti-Racist Action, which trained new radicals. These projects were limited in their long-term effects. While the ARA fought against racism, most members were white and the movement failed to move beyond the punk scene. Despite this, so one of the articles that was recommended or signed for this meeting in particular was Eric Curl's Contemporary Anarchism. He also did a podcast, which I'll reference at the end, on We Are Many, where he talked about that, despite the anti-racist action, and I believe the parent organization, which was anarchist, was called Love and Rage. And he felt that, even though this had limited reach, he felt it was one of the most effective organizing projects that anarchists did in the modern era. So I thought that was interesting, and Anti-Racist Action was also pretty active in Chicago, where I came from as well. Going on, politics of the personal is revolutionary class politics, veganism, lifestyle choices such as squatting, punk-styled communes, freight train traveling, which this zine up in the corner here, door was never locked. I took a picture of some zines I had, and this one in particular was kind of like a guide to how to hop on freight trains, travel for free from Chicago to Seattle, where to go to kind of squat or find a place to live. I thought this was kind of cool stuff back then. And, that was kind of like their kind of utopian vision in a way of living for free. But, as we'll get into, this still operates under capitalism. These lifestyle choices served as utopian-styled experiments. They had a tendency towards an idealism rather than the Marxist materialist perspective, which examines the material conditions that shape our development as a society. Anarchism broke into identity-based anarchisms. Green anarchism, anarcho-feminism, anarchist people of color, form groups, queer anarchism, trans anarchism, and there's a bunch more. There's, anarcho-communism, anarcho-collectivism, many different kinds of anarchism. 90s continued, Seattle 99. Anarchism was influenced by global resistance to neoliberalism, such as the Zapatista uprising. There's some pictures on the left. The Seattle 99 WTO protests revived the anarchist movement with a shift to protest tactics and away from being about the nature of oppression in politics. Curl discusses a problem with contemporary anarchism that the tactic became the goal. Protest tactics and politics of the personal became itself the revolutionary vehicle to changing society. Pre-figurative politics. Another problem with contemporary anarchists that Curl discusses is a retreat from any goals-based long-term strategy. Pre-figurative politics aim to prefigure or think ahead an anarchist ideal of social relations. This shows in the lifestyle politics of anarchists, collectives, affinity groups, consensus, a focus on how we live our lives, individualism, local community, being apolitical as opposed to finding the best way to achieve a struggle. Anarchist David Graeber said, to prefigure the future society, we need to reject the legitimacy of the current order. Prefigurative politics means we should live as if we are already free. Emma Goldman describes the idea no revolution can ever succeed as a factor of liberation unless the means used to further it be identical in spirit and tendency with the purposes achieved. Anarchist communalist Murray Bookchin's vision of social change involved people living a revolutionary lifestyle that would lead to changing society. The problem with prefigurative politics is it does not challenge capitalism. Anarchists living in a communal punk house aren't challenging capitalism. They are only living in a bubble within it and are still subject to oppression under that system, as others are. Prefigurative politics cannot wish away racism, capitalism, and oppression. Make no demands. John Holloway felt that activists should not try to overthrow the state, take it over, or make demands on it because it will legitimize the state. With this, anarchists espouse the idea of occupy everything but demand nothing. Revolutionary socialists disagree on this tactic. We see that there is a benefit to pushing for reforms or short-term gains, such as better wage for workers and criminal convictions of police who have murdered innocents. Fighting for reforms can unite people around a cause, organize workers, and awaken in them revolutionary consciousness. Reformism, on the other hand, a top-down strategy which primarily focuses on reforms within a capitalist state and becoming reliant on the electoral system, is also not congruent with our vision of a bottom-up working-class revolution. Consistent with the example of the Spanish Revolution mentioned earlier, neither abstaining from power nor only working towards reforms in capitalism, neither of those things will uplift the working class. Black bloc. Insurrectionary anarchism is a trend that espouses vandalism and rioting as a primary tactic. It perceives that traditional or mainstream forms of protest are reinforcing state power. Insurrectionary anarchists use black bloc and other street tactics to supposedly expose this power. Street tactics for protest include wearing all black to conceal one's identity, operating autonomously with no central leadership, and coming equipped to engage in direct action, gas masks, tools for property destruction and attacking the police. With autonomy and ambiguity, black bloc anarchists escape accountability for their actions. This is harmful as it puts blame and provokes police violence on other activists. Consensus-based decision-making. Many anarchists follow the tradition of consensus-based decision-making, where everyone has come to an agreement or a consensus. If all members do not agree, no action is taken. This model can lead to a minority to either hold up, halt, or influence the decision-making process. This is not consistent with the idea of democracy, which is the decision-making with a majority rule. Even some anarchists reject this idea as elitist and fundamentally undemocratic. This model has allowed a well-organized few to control disorganized others in a movement. D'Amato said this led to the creation of behind-the-scenes leaders who are not elected and therefore unaccountable. Anarchists resolve the issue of state power by going around it. They attempt to create spaces independent of authoritarian control with autonomous zones. Hakim Bey, which was a pen name, said that temporary autonomous zones must evade the violence of the state instead of challenging it. So invading instead of challenging. Yeah, Peter Lamborn Wilson. Thank you, Fury. Anarchists believe the idea of dual power, wherein they believe in creating counter institutions to provide for their needs in opposition to the state authority. Autonomous zones in a capitalist state will not survive within capitalism for long. They would eventually be taken down by the state. And this was the case in last year in Seattle with CHOP and CHAZ, which was Capitol Hill occupied protest or Capitol Hill autonomous zone. Almost to the end here. Similarities, differences between the two. So both anarchism and revolutionary socialism, both are anti-capitalist, have revolutionary aims, are for the abolition of private property, In most cases, that's why I put the asterisk there. There are some, I believe they're called anarcho-capitalists that probably want private property, or there's a type of anarchist called libertarian communists, which are basically anarchists, so might disagree on that. Both are anti-fascist, opposed to mainstream political parties, and anti-imperialist. Anarchists, where they tend towards individualism, socialists are collectivist in design. Where anarchists believe in political abstention, socialists work towards for reforms as short-term goals. Where anarchists refuse to take power, socialists want workers to take power. Consensus-based decision-making, socialists believe in democratic decision-making. Where anarchists are anti-authority, socialists want the promotion of collective workers' authority through workers' councils. Anarchists want a small secretive group to incite a revolution, whereas socialists want an organized workers' vanguard to lead a revolution. Anarchists are not consistently pro-worker or supportive of the masses, as we saw earlier, where anarchists are based on their whole principle, or sorry, socialists are based on the principle of uplifting the working class. With dual power, socialists believe on replacing the capitalist state instead of working within it. Anarchists believe in a focus on identity-based politics, where revolutionary socialists focus on a fight against all forms of oppression, with the distinction that some groups are oppressed more than others. Anarchists tend towards idealism, and socialists are more for materialism. And last real slide here is about working together. So that being said, all those differences in discussing anarchism, despite all that ideological and tactical differences with anarchists, we support the idea of a united front where we work together with anarchists and other radicals towards a mutual benefit, such as uniting against Nazis or the police. We will still highlight our differences when we disagree with anarchists and other socialists to keep the working class struggle, opposition to imperialism, and the fight against oppression at the forefront. We wish to engage in dialogue with other radicals such as anarchists in hopes of winning them over to our tradition's view of a permanent international bottom-up working class revolution. I threw in some questions here for discussion. I don't need to read those out loud. I'll leave that up there for a moment.